Hey there, I'm Jonathan, and I want to ask you today, what's your story? Our stories are important. Your story is important. My story is important. They're important because our stories color the way that we understand God and we understand His story. And so what I want to do, I want to take a few videos, and I want to, over the course of these videos, tell you my story, and then I want to challenge you to share yours. The way you understand God is a piece of your story, and it needs to be heard. So I want to encourage you to share it. So I want to start with a little bit, or the first chapter in this video of my story. And my story begins in church because, I've spent most of my life there. I remember when I was a little kid in preschool growing up, I remember crawling around on the floor in my cowboy boots, and I remember that because I got in trouble for scuffing up the toes. My story, it's got adults in it who from that time cared about me. They taught me the stories from Scripture. They taught me about Noah and his boat. They taught me about Moses parting the Red Sea. They taught me about King David. They taught me about Elijah calling on God to send fire down from heaven and to light the altar with the sacrifice he prepared. And they told me stories of Jesus and what he did for me. And so I learned a lot, and I learned them from adults who were full of compassion and I knew cared about me and loved me well. Church is kind of church from the beginning, and church was really fun for me. I grew up in a world where church was about best friends. It was about Pinewood derbies. It was about things like breakfasts and basketball games where these men would allow me there with my dad. They'd make me one of the guys, and so that was really important to me. It was about music. Music's always been an important part of my life. It was about music. It was about children's choirs, and it was about standing next to my dad as he sang these songs of faith with all of his voice. And then it was also about sin. Sin's the dark part of life. And the thing about sin is that when you grow up in church, you don't mind talking about it, because it starts, kind of like a headline, like King David disobeyed God. And you begin to learn about it that way. But then at some point, it became personal for me. There was a Sunday in 1984, it was a long time ago, wasn't it? There was a Sunday in 1984 where I realized the weight of my sin. Sin became, as an 8-year-old, sin became personal to me, and the full gravity of the emotional gravity of the reality that I had disobeyed God personally came down on my shoulders. And I realized that in that moment I'd sinned, and when I realized that, everything had changed. And that was kind of the moment when the rubber really hit the road, because all of those stories that I had been taught by all those caring adults, they all converged in that moment. And I felt all that weight of my sin, but then also the realization, the gravity of what it meant to trust in Jesus. And I knew it was a big decision. And so at 8 years old, I took a week to think about it, because I knew it was an important decision and I knew I should take it seriously. And that following Sunday, I decided it was time. And at the end of the church service, I got up out of the seat I was sitting in, and I walked down an aisle and I talked with a pastor, and he led me in this prayer that told God that I was ready to trust in Jesus. And that was the moment when everything changed. Well, and then junior high happened. But that's the next story. And so, as you take a look and as you listen to a few minutes of my story, I want to ask you, what's your story? I want to ask you to share it. Make a video. Send an email. I'd like to hear your story, and I'd like to know how your story is intersected with God.